Would you say you hate men?
I hate the patriarchy. There's a lot of really good men.
Judd?
Answer the question.
Do I hate men? No.
That's a lie.
Men are tired. The most shocking truth emerging right now is that a growing number of men are choosing solitude over relationships, with surveys indicating that 6 in 10 men would rather stay single than endure constant conflict and stress, marking a profound shift where men are finally prioritizing their own peace and self-worth after decades of imbalance. Imagine a world where men, exhausted from carrying the weight of expectations that never seem to be reciprocated, simply step back, keep their resources, guard their energy, and discover genuine calm in their own company, while the very systems built on traditional dynamics begin to reveal their cracks, leaving many women facing a reality they never anticipated, one that grows clearer with each passing year. And by the end of this discussion, you will understand exactly why this change is not temporary, why it is accelerating, and why it represents a permanent rebalancing that no amount of denial or blame shifting can reverse. Because once men taste true freedom, they rarely return to the old patterns. Men have reached a point of deep fatigue after years of navigating a landscape stacked against them in ways both subtle and overt. They have shouldered the primary responsibility for financial provision in relationships, often while facing criticism for not doing enough, even when they exceed expectations. And this burden has compounded over time through repeated experiences of rejection, inconsistent appreciation, and societal narratives that portray traditional male roles as outdated or oppressive, while still demanding them when convenient. In the past, men pursued partnerships with the understanding that mutual effort and respect would form the foundation. Yet, increasingly, they encountered dynamics where their contributions were taken for granted, their vulnerabilities dismissed, and their masculinity scrutinized or weaponized against them. This has led to a collective awakening where men recognize that their well-being does not depend on external validation from romantic pursuits, and instead, they are turning inward to build lives centered on personal growth, hobbies, financial independence, and meaningful, non-romantic connections. The result is a noticeable withdrawal from the traditional dating and marriage market, not out of bitterness alone, but from a rational assessment that solitude offers greater stability and contentment than the risks and imbalances they have encountered. Women, in turn, are beginning to confront the downstream effects of this shift as economic pressures mount and the support structures once assumed to be available begin to fade, highlighting how interdependent these roles truly were, despite efforts to redefine them unilaterally. Men have always possessed the capacity for minimalism, thriving on straightforward routines, self-reliance, and focused pursuits without needing elaborate external comforts to feel fulfilled. Whereas many women find that simplicity equates to deprivation when accustomed to higher standards of living that rely on combined resources. This natural difference becomes stark in times of economic strain, where men adapt by scaling back without distress, while others struggle to maintain previous lifestyles independently. The decision for men to step away stems from accumulated experiences across dating, long-term commitments, and broader social interactions, where patterns of manipulation, conflict creation for stimulation, and shifting accountability have eroded trust. Men recall instances where genuine approaches were met with hostility or dismissal, where efforts to build something lasting were undermined by unrealistic expectations or external influences promoting division rather than partnership. Over decades, movements emphasizing female empowerment have sometimes crossed into territory that vilified male traits, leading to environments where men felt perpetually on trial rather than valued as equals. false accusations, biased legal outcomes in family matters, and cultural shaming for natural behaviors have all contributed to this weariness, pushing men towards self preservation. Now, in what some call the soft guy era, men embrace a mindset of refusing to chase or overextend, instead, demanding reciprocity from the outset or opting out entirely. Terms like drizzle drizzle have emerged as lighthearted yet pointed affirmations of this boundary, signaling that men will no longer accept one sided dynamics and will prioritize their own standards, even if it means remaining alone. This is not about revenge, but about reclaiming agency after recognizing that peace in solitude far outweighs the chaos of mismatched expectations. Women who once dismissed or belittled these concerns now express surprise or frustration as they navigate independence in harsher realities, realizing too late that the freedom they championed came with trade offs they did not fully anticipate. Careers and education were prioritized with the assumption that partnership options would remain abundant later. Yet demographic trends show delayed or foregone family formation, leading to isolation for many in midlife. Economic instability amplifies this as global pressures make dual income stability more essential. Yet men increasingly view adding a partner as introducing unnecessary risk rather than benefit, and have learned to thrive with less, finding luxury and control over their time and finances, while for others, the same conditions feel like hardship. This divergence underscores why men are content in their withdrawal, investing in personal development, travel, skills, and communities that align with their values without the drama that often accompanied past relationships. The shift is evident in declining engagement in traditional courtship, with men choosing hobbies, fitness, intellectual pursuits, or even minimal social circles over the pursuit of romance that promises more stress than reward. They have observed how societal changes have altered incentives, where accountability seems uneven and rewards disproportionate to effort. In response, they conserve their energy for what truly enhances their lives, discovering that happiness does not require partnership when self respect is intact. This realization spreads through shared experiences online and in person, reinforcing the choice to walk away as a logical, empowering decision rather than a defeat. Women facing these changes sometimes attribute them to external factors or blame men broadly, yet the core stems from accumulated actions and cultural messaging that eroded mutual respect over generations. Men are not angry in the traditional sense anymore. They are resolute, having processed the exhaustion and emerged with clarity that their worth exists independently. They maintain boundaries firmly, refusing to entertain dynamics that drain rather than uplift. This creates a feedback loop where fewer men participate in the old game, making the market for traditional relationships thinner and forcing a reevaluation on all sides. The peace men find in this era is profound, built on financial autonomy, emotional stability, and freedom from unnecessary conflict. They pursue passions without compromise, travel on their terms, build wealth steadily, and cultivate inner calm that external validation could never provide. For many, the solitude is not loneliness, but liberation, a deliberate choice after weighing the alternatives and finding them wanting. The narrative that men must always pursue or provide has lost its hold, replaced by one where self prioritization is the default. This transformation is not sudden, but the culmination of years of observation, reflection, and adjustment to a changing world. Men have seen the patterns repeat across friends, family, and media, confirming that stepping back preserves sanity and resources better than persisting in flawed systems. They value authenticity over performance, substance over superficiality, and long term well being over short term approval. In embracing this, they redefine success on their own terms, finding fulfillment in simplicity, discipline, and personal mastery. The broader implications touch economies, demographics, and social structures as lower partnership rates influence everything from housing to birth trends. Yet, for individual men, the primary gain is internal tranquility. They rest easier knowing their efforts serve themselves first, unburdened by obligations that were never truly mutual. This era marks a quiet revolution where men reclaim their narrative, choosing paths that align with their nature rather than societal scripts that no longer serve them. The exhaustion men feel today is not born from a single event, but from a long accumulation of imbalances that have tilted the scales of relationships and society against them for far too long. They have watched as cultural conversations shifted to emphasize female independence while still quietly expecting male provision, protection, and emotional labor without equivalent returns. In workplaces, men have faced policies and narratives that sometimes frame their ambition as toxic or their presence as intrusive, even as they continue to dominate the most dangerous and demanding jobs that keep infrastructure running. On the dating front, approaches that were once met with politeness or at least neutral acknowledgement now frequently trigger defensive or hostile responses, reinforced by widespread messaging that any unsolicited interaction from a man carries inherent risk. These experiences compound, creating a feedback loop where men reduce their efforts, receive even less positive reinforcement, and eventually conclude that the game is rigged in a way that no longer justifies participation. What once felt like a worthwhile pursuit now registers as an unnecessary drain on time, money, and mental health. Men have begun documenting these patterns openly, sharing stories of court systems that favor one side in custody and support decisions, of workplaces where diversity initiatives sometimes translate to overlooked promotions for qualified men, and of social circles where expressing traditional views invites swift condemnation. Through these shared accounts, a clearer picture emerges of why withdrawal makes sense. Solitude, by contrast, delivers consistency. A man controls his schedule, his budget, his environment, and his emotional state without the constant negotiation or risk of sudden upheaval that partnerships can bring. He wakes up without dread of impending conflict, spends his earnings on what genuinely interests him rather than on appeasing escalating demands, and builds routines that foster discipline and growth instead of reactivity and compromise. This shift towards self reliance reveals something fundamental about male nature that society has often downplayed. Men are remarkably adaptable when the incentives change. Remove the promise of mutual respect and appreciation, replace it with scrutiny and liability, and men do not cling desperately to the old model. They pivot. They redirect their energy inward and outward in directions that reward them directly. Fitness becomes not just about appearance, but about mastering the body and building resilience. Hobbies transform from occasional distractions into deep sources of mastery and community. Financial discipline turns from a chore into a form of empowerment, allowing men to accumulate assets that provide security no partner can revoke. Travel becomes spontaneous rather than negotiated. Friendships deepen when freed from the shadow of romantic competition or jealousy. In this recalibration, men discover layers of satisfaction that were previously overshadowed by the pursuit of approval or partnership. The soft guy era captures this evolution perfectly. It is not weakness or retreat, but strategic restraint, a deliberate refusal to perform the role of pursuer, provider, or emotional sponge unless the dynamic is genuinely reciprocal from the start. Men in this mindset set clear standards early. They observe behavior before investing, They walk away from red flags without prolonged debate. They value their peace above the temporary thrill of attention or intimacy that comes with hidden costs. Drizzle drizzle, as a phrase, distills this attitude into something playful yet firm, a verbal boundary that says the old rules no longer apply and that men will no longer tolerate being treated as disposable utilities. This language resonates because it reflects a truth many have lived. After years of being told they are privileged while simultaneously bearing disproportionate burdens, men are opting for the one form of privilege they can fully control, which is the privilege of saying no. No to drama, no to unequal effort, no to relationships that feel more like ongoing negotiations than partnerships. No to societal scripts that demand sacrifice without gratitude. This refusal is quiet but resolute, spreading through conversations, memes, forums, and everyday choices. It manifests in statistics showing men marrying later or not at all, in declining birth rates driven partly by male disengagement, in the rise of single man households that report higher life satisfaction than expected, and in the growing number of men who describe their single status as a deliberate choice rather than a failure. Women encountering this reality sometimes react with confusion or anger, wondering why the men they once dismissed are no longer available or interested. They point to economic hardship, loneliness, or the absence of family as evidence that something has gone wrong, yet rarely connect these outcomes directly to the cultural messaging that encourage viewing men as optional, problematic, or replaceable. The irony is sharp. Decades of rhetoric promoting female autonomy succeeded in many ways, producing generations of accomplished, educated women who excel in careers and personal pursuits. Yet that same rhetoric often framed traditional male contributions as suspect or oppressive, eroding the mutual appreciation that once sustained long term bonds. When men internalized the message that their role was no longer valued or was actively criticized, they adjusted accordingly. They stopped volunteering for roles that carried high risk and low reward. They conserved resources for themselves. They built lives that did not depend on external partnership for fulfillment. The result is a growing asymmetry where men increasingly thrive in independence while many women face unexpected challenges in maintaining the lifestyles they envisioned. Economic realities accelerate this divide. Inflation, housing costs, and stagnant wages in many sectors make dual income arrangements more practical than ever. Yet men view the addition of a partner as a potential liability rather than an asset when past experiences suggest higher likelihood of conflict, financial demands, or legal entanglements than of genuine teamwork. Minimalism suits men naturally because their baseline needs tend toward function over extravagance. A reliable vehicle, comfortable living space, quality food, access to fitness, and time for personal interests often suffice for deep contentment. Women, socialized differently and facing different pressures, frequently require more elaborate structures to feel secure and fulfilled, structures that historically relied on combined resources. When that support withdraws, the gap becomes painful. Women in their 30s and 40s increasingly voice concerns about affordability, about the difficulty of homeownership alone, about the absence of shared burdens in raising children if they choose that path later. These complaints surface in public forums and sometimes laced with frustration toward men who have chosen solitude, yet the underlying cause traces back to choices made earlier, choices influenced by a culture that celebrated individual achievement while downplaying interdependence. Men did not create this environment alone. They responded to it. They observed the patterns of hypergamy amplified by technology, where options seemed infinite and standards rose accordingly. They saw relationships dissolve over minor disagreements magnified into deal breakers. They experienced the sting of being replaced quickly or discarded when better prospects appeared. They noted how accountability often flowed one way while blame flowed the other. In response, they withdrew not out of spite, but out of self respect. The peace they find now is hard earned. It comes from mornings free of tension, evenings spent on chosen activities rather than conflict resolution. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Finances that grow steadily instead of being diverted to placate or compensate. It comes from friendships unburdened by romantic subtext, from hobbies pursued to mastery rather than as escapes, from a sense of control that no external validation can match. This tranquility is addictive once tasted. Men who have lived both ways rarely revert. They recognize that the old model demanded performance, sacrifice, and risk with diminishing returns, while the new path offers consistency, growth, and autonomy. Society may label this shift as selfish or immature, but men see it as survival. They have learned that their value does not depend on being needed by others, that their masculinity is not defined by how much they endure for someone else, that happiness flows from internal alignment rather than external approval. This realization reshapes priorities. Career advancement becomes about personal achievement and security rather than impressing potential partners. Physical health becomes non negotiable because it supports long term independence. Financial literacy deepens because wealth provides options, not obligations. Social connections focus on quality over quantity, favoring those who respect boundaries and share values. In this framework, relationships are no longer the default goal, but an optional enhancement that must clear a high bar of mutual respect, low drama, and genuine reciprocity. Anything less is declined without apology. This standard raises the quality of interactions when they do occur, but it also reduces their frequency dramatically. Men are content with the trade off. They understand that abundance in options does not equate to abundance in quality, and they prefer scarcity with dignity over volume with stress. The broader culture has yet to fully grapple with these changes. Media continues to portray single men as lonely or deficient while celebrating single women as empowered, overlooking the data showing many men reporting higher satisfaction in solitude. Policy discussions around family formation often focus on incentives for women or children while ignoring the male disengagement driving lower participation. Conversations about mental health highlight female loneliness more prominently, even as evidence mounts that men are finding stability precisely by stepping away from the dynamics that once eroded theirs. Yet the trend continues. More men embrace minimalism, discipline, and self mastery. They document their journeys not to boast, but to affirm that another path exists, one where peace is not conditional on partnership. They share strategies for financial independence, mental resilience, and boundary setting, creating informal networks that reinforce the choice to prioritize self. This movement is organic, decentralized, and accelerating because it aligns with observable reality rather than imposed ideology. Men see the evidence in their own lives and in the lives of peers. They witness friends who stayed in unbalanced relationships lose years to stress, legal battles, or emotional exhaustion, while those who walked away rebuild stronger, calmer, and more prosperous. The contrast is undeniable. It fuels the conviction that solitude is not a consolation prize, but a superior alternative for those who value their own well being above societal expectations. As this awareness spreads, the cultural narrative begins to shift in subtle ways. Younger men enter adulthood already skeptical of traditional roles, having grown up observing the fallout of previous generations. They adopt the soft guy mindset early, refusing to chase or overinvest from the outset. They demand clarity and reciprocity immediately, filtering out mismatches before deep attachment forms. This proactive boundary setting prevents much of the pain older cohorts endured, creating a virtuous cycle where fewer men experience betrayal or exploitation because they never allow it to progress far. The outcome is a generation better equipped for self directed lives, less tethered to external approval, and more resilient to economic or social turbulence. Women navigating this landscape face a steeper learning curve. Those who internalized messages of perpetual optionality now encounter scarcity where abundance was promised. They adjust expectations, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with resentment. Yet adaptation is inevitable. Some double down on independence, building robust careers, networks, and personal fulfillment without reliance on men. Others reevaluate past stances, recognizing that mutual respect and cooperation serve both sides better than unilateral redefinition of roles. A few openly critique the excesses of earlier movements, acknowledging that demonizing half the population carried unintended consequences. These voices, though still minority, signal that reflection is possible. The conversation evolves slowly, but it evolves because reality refuses to bend to ideology forever. Men, meanwhile, remain largely unmoved by appeals to return to old patterns. They have tasted freedom. They know its worth. They guard it carefully. Their era of quiet withdrawal is not an ending, but a new beginning, one defined by self ownership, intentional living, and unapologetic prioritization of personal peace. In this space, men rebuild not just their lives, but their sense of identity, free from scripts that no longer serve them. They walk forward with clarity, rested and resolute, understanding that true strength lies not in enduring dysfunction, but in choosing better. The quiet confidence that men carry in this new phase stems directly from the clarity they have gained through detachment. They no longer second guess every interaction or wonder whether their intentions will be misinterpreted. Instead, they operate from a place of settled certainty that their value exists regardless of romantic involvement. This internal shift changes how they present themselves to the world. Conversations become more direct because there is nothing left to lose. Humor returns without the filter of trying to please. Boundaries appear naturally rather than defensively because they arise from genuine self respect instead of reaction to past hurts. Men in this space speak plainly about what they will and will not accept, and they do so without anger clouding the message. The tone is calm, firm, matter of fact. They explain their standards once and move on when those standards are not met. There is no prolonged negotiation or attempt to convince. The energy once spent on persuasion now fuels personal projects, skill development, and the steady expansion of their own lives. This redirection produces visible results over time. Bodies become stronger through consistent training, unmotivated by external admiration. Finances grow through disciplined saving and investing rather than lavish spending to impress. Minds sharpen through reading, reflection, and deliberate learning instead of constant emotional processing. Careers advance because focus remains unbroken by relationship turbulence. Homes become sanctuaries of order and function rather than stages for performance. Every area improves when the primary audience is the man himself. This compounding effect reinforces the decision to stay detached. Each small win builds momentum. Each avoided disaster confirms the wisdom of caution. Men look back at previous chapters and see how much unnecessary strain they tolerated simply because they believed it was required. They recognize now that much of what was labeled maturity was actually endurance of dysfunction. True maturity, they conclude, lies in knowing when to exit a losing proposition and in building something better in its place. The exit itself requires no fanfare. It happens through action rather than declaration. A man stops initiating contact. He declines invitations that feel obligatory. He redirects conversations away from romantic framing. He invests time elsewhere. Over months, the pattern solidifies into a lifestyle. Friends notice the change and often mirror it themselves. Networks form around shared priorities of self improvement, financial literacy, physical discipline, and mutual respect without hidden agendas. These connections differ markedly from past social dynamics. They lack the undercurrent of competition or validation seeking that frequently accompanied mixed gender groups. Conversations center on ideas, goals, experiences, and practical solutions rather than drama or status games. Laughter comes easily because tension is absent. Support exists without strings because no one is auditioning for a role. This environment nurtures growth in ways romantic pursuits rarely did. Men exchange knowledge on investing strategies, workout programming, career navigation, mental frameworks, and life optimization. They challenge each other constructively rather than tearing down to feel superior. Accountability flows naturally because everyone understands the cost of stagnation. The collective result is a rising tide of competence and composure that further distances participants from the old relational model. They see clearly now that many of the conflicts they once navigated stemmed from mismatched incentives rather than irreconcilable differences. When one party expects provision while offering minimal reciprocity, when hypergamous tendencies meet economic realities, when cultural narratives encourage perpetual upgrading over commitment, friction becomes inevitable. Men have studied these mechanics long enough to predict outcomes with high accuracy. They spot entitlement early through subtle tests of behavior. They recognize manipulation through inconsistencies between words and actions. They identify emotional volatility before it escalates into chaos. Armed with this discernment, they filter ruthlessly. Only those who demonstrate genuine character, emotional stability, and equal investment pass the initial threshold. The bar sits high because the downside risk remains significant while the upside appears increasingly marginal. Many women interpret this selectivity as arrogance or bitterness. They frame it as men being unable to handle strong women or fearing commitment. Yet the reality is simpler and less emotional. Men have recalculated the risk reward equation based on empirical evidence. From their own lives and from widespread observation, the data points overwhelmingly toward caution. Divorce statistics, custody outcomes, financial settlements, false allegation rates, workplace biases, social shaming campaigns, and everyday experiences of rejection or dismissal all weigh on the same side of the scale. When balanced against the benefits of companionship that can often be replicated through friendship, hobbies, and self sufficiency, the equation tilts decisively toward independence. This is not hatred, it is arithmetic. Men apply the same rational assessment to relationships that they apply to investments, career moves, or major purchases. They ask whether the expected return justifies the exposure. Increasingly, the answer is no. The soft guy era embodies this pragmatic stance. Soft does not mean weak. It means selective, restrained, unhurried. A man in this mode moves slowly through interactions. He observes more than he performs. He listens intently to detect alignment or misalignment. He reveals himself gradually rather than rushing to prove worth. This approach frustrates those accustomed to immediate pursuit or constant reassurance. It forces others to meet him at his level or accept disengagement. The dynamic reverses traditional scripts. No longer does the man chase validation. No longer or does he absorb disproportionate emotional labor. No longer does he tolerate inconsistency in the hope of eventual reciprocity. He simply maintains his frame and allows natural consequences to unfold. Women who value substance over flash adapt quickly. They recognize the rarity of a man who refuses to play games, who communicates clearly, who enforces boundaries without cruelty. Those relationships, when they form, tend toward greater stability because both parties enter with eyes open and expectations calibrated. Yet such pairings remain exceptional rather than common. The majority of interactions end early because the mismatch becomes apparent before significant investment occurs. This early termination prevents deep entanglement and preserves resources for more rewarding pursuits. Men emerge from these brief encounters unscathed. They carry forward lessons without scars. Their emotional capital remains intact for self directed endeavors. Over years, this pattern produces profound personal transformation. Confidence solidifies, not from conquest, but from consistent self mastery. Resilience builds not from surviving chaos, but from avoiding it proactively. Contentment deepens, not from external affirmation, but from internal congruence. Men reach a state where solitude feels like abundance rather than absence. They fill their days with purpose, variety, and quiet satisfaction. Mornings begin with intention rather than anxiety. Evenings conclude with reflection rather than rumination. Weekends unfold according to personal design rather than compromise. The freedom is comprehensive. Financial freedom allows choices without guilt. Temporal freedom permits deep focus without interruption. Emotional freedom removes the background hum of potential conflict. Physical freedom supports consistent vitality without compromise for others. Intellectual freedom encourages curiosity without censorship. All of these freedoms interconnect to create a life that feels expansive even within simple parameters. Men discover that less complexity yields more depth. They trade breadth of shallow connections for depth in selected areas. They prioritize quality over quantity across every domain. This philosophy extends beyond romance into broader lifestyle choices. They curate environments that reinforce calm rather than stimulate drama. Minimal possessions reduce maintenance and decision fatigue. Intentional routines eliminate wasted motion. Selective social exposure preserves energy for high value interactions. Disciplined consumption protects wealth and mental clarity. The cumulative effect resembles a well tuned machine running at peak efficiency with minimal friction. External pressures still exist. Economic uncertainty persists. Cultural narratives continue to evolve. Yet men navigate these currents from a position of greater leverage because their baseline happiness no longer depends on partnership. They can afford to wait. They can afford to walk away. They can afford to remain single indefinitely because the alternative state already delivers fulfillment. This leverage changes power dynamics subtly but permanently. Men no longer feel compelled to accept suboptimal arrangements out of fear of loneliness. They no longer tolerate disrespect in exchange for companionship. They no longer subsidize lifestyles that do not reciprocate value. The old incentives dissolve. What remains is a marketplace where participation requires mutual high standards, or graceful non participation. Many choose the latter and thrive in doing so. Society will eventually adjust to this new equilibrium. Demographic trends already reflect the shift. Marriage ages continue rising, birth rates decline further, single person households multiply, economic patterns adapt to smaller family units and different consumption behaviors. Cultural products begin portraying male independence more favorably as the reality becomes undeniable. Policy responses may attempt to reverse the trend through incentives or messaging, yet they face an uphill battle against lived experience. Men who have internalized self prioritization rarely unlearn it. The taste of genuine peace overrides nostalgia for past roles. They guard their autonomy jealously because they understand its fragility in unbalanced systems. This guardianship manifests in continued selectivity, in refusal to revert to provider archetypes without ironclad reciprocity, in open communication about boundaries, and in steady investment in self. The path forward remains clear. Men walk it deliberately, one intentional choice at a time. They build lives that reflect their true nature rather than societal prescription. They find strength in restraint, joy in simplicity, power in detachment. The era they inhabit is not one of defeat, but of redefinition. It is an era where men finally claim the right to define success on their own terms, where peace becomes the primary metric, and where walking away represents not loss, but victory over outdated expectations. In this space, they rest, they grow, they prosper, and they remain resolute that the journey ahead belongs to them alone, unless shared with someone who truly matches their level of respect and effort. The transformation men undergo in this phase extends far beyond surface level lifestyle adjustments into a fundamental reordering of identity and purpose. They stop measuring worth through the lens of how desirable or useful they appear to others and begin evaluating every decision against the standard of whether it enhances their own sovereignty and long term vitality. This internal compass recalibrates priorities with surgical precision. Ambition no longer serves the goal of attracting or retaining a partner. It serves the expansion of personal capability and security. Physical training shifts from performative aesthetics designed to garner compliments toward functional strength that supports independence across decades. Intellectual pursuits deepen because curiosity drives them rather than the need to sound impressive in conversation. Financial choices harden into unbreakable principles of delayed gratification and asset accumulation because wealth now represents freedom from coercion rather than a tool for courtship. Every domain of life becomes an extension of this core commitment to self ownership. Men noticed how much mental bandwidth was previously consumed by anticipating needs, decoding signals, managing expectations, and repairing ruptures that never needed to occur. Reclaiming that bandwidth feels like waking from a prolonged fog. Thoughts flow clearer, decisions arrive faster and with greater conviction. Creativity surges because energy no longer leaks into emotional firefighting. Productivity climbs as distractions diminish. Sleep improves because the nervous system no longer stays primed for potential conflict. The physiological benefits alone would justify the shift even if no other gains existed. Cortisol levels stabilize, restorative processes accelerate, immune function strengthens. Chronic low grade inflammation that once accompanied prolonged stress begins to recede. Men in their 30s and 40s frequently report feeling physically younger than they did in their 20s, precisely because they have eliminated the largest single source of unnecessary tension from their daily existence. This rejuvenation compounds across years. A man who exits unbalanced dynamics at 30 can realistically expect 2 or 3 additional decades of high functioning vitality compared to one who remains entangled in cycles of drama and over responsibility. The arithmetic is unforgiving. Time spent in chronic relational friction is time irretrievably lost from peak health, peak cognition, and peak opportunity. Men who recognize this math early act decisively. They treat their lifespan as the finite resource it is and allocate it accordingly. Relationships, when considered at all, must pass a threshold test of net positive contribution across every metric: emotional, financial, temporal, physical, intellectual. Anything that scores neutral or negative receives no further consideration. This standard eliminates the majority of prospects before attachment even begins to form. The filtering process becomes almost automatic. A single display of inconsistency, entitlement, volatility, or lack of reciprocity triggers immediate disengagement. There is no debate, no hope that things will improve, no investment in potential. The default is preservation of self. Only exceptional alignment earns sustained attention. Even then, the pace remains deliberate. Trust accrues slowly through consistent demonstration rather than declarations. Intimacy develops as a byproduct of mutual respect rather than as a primary objective. When relationships do take root under these conditions, they tend toward durability because the foundation rests on reality rather than fantasy or social pressure. Yet the overwhelming majority of men in this mindset find that the exceptional cases remain rare enough that solitude continues as the dominant state. They accept this outcome not with resignation, but with satisfaction. The absence of partnership no longer registers as deprivation when every other area of life flourishes. They cultivate richness through depth rather than breadth. A handful of high caliber friendships replace sprawling social networks. Mastery in chosen disciplines supplants the pursuit of novelty. Meaning emerges from contribution to self selected causes rather than from fulfilling predefined roles. Spiritual or philosophical exploration often intensifies because the quiet of solitude creates space for profound questions that constant stimulation once drowned out. Men read more deeply, meditate more consistently, journal with greater honesty, reflect with sharper clarity. They confront their own shadows without distraction and integrate them rather than projecting them outward. This inner work produces a quiet authority that radiates without effort. People sense it immediately. Posture straightens, voice steadies, eye contact hold without aggression or avoidance. Presence becomes magnetic precisely because it seeks nothing. Women sometimes attempt to re engage men who have reached this level of composure only to discover that the window has closed. The man who once chased now observes dispassionately. He appreciates beauty and intelligence when he encounters them, but feels no compulsion to pursue. The old hunger has been replaced by self sufficiency. Attempts at flirtation or seduction land softly and without effect because the incentive structure no longer exists. He responds politely when warranted and redirects energy elsewhere when it is not. This detachment frustrates those accustomed to wielding attention as currency. They interpret it as coldness or ego when in truth it represents the absence of need. Men no longer require external affirmation to feel whole. The validation loop has been internalized. They affirm themselves through action, discipline, and results. Each completed project, each preserved boundary, each avoided pitfall reinforces the belief that their path is correct. Doubt fades, certainty solidifies. Over time, the certainty becomes unshakable. External criticism bounces off because it originates from a worldview that no longer applies. Appeals to tradition, to biological imperatives, to societal duty, to romantic idealism, all encounter the same calm rebuttal grounded in lived experience rather than theory. Men point to their own flourishing as evidence. They point to peers who followed the same route and emerged stronger. They point to statistics showing rising male life satisfaction and singlehood, while other metrics stagnate or decline. The data aligns with observation. The narrative of male crisis no longer holds when examined against reality. Loneliness surveys frequently conflate solitude with isolation, yet men distinguish the two sharply. Solitude chosen deliberately enhances life. Isolation imposed by rejection or circumstance diminishes it. The distinction matters. Men in the current era overwhelmingly report the former. They maintain rich non romantic connections, pursue absorbing interests, contribute meaningfully in their domains, and experience regular states of flow and contentment. Loneliness rarely enters the equation because the self has become a reliable source of companionship. They enjoy their own company without apology. Silence feels nourishing rather than empty. Time alone becomes sacred rather than something to fill. Discomfort with self represents perhaps the most profound victory of the entire shift. Men have reclaimed the ability to exist fully without needing another to complete them. The cultural script that insists partnership equals wholeness has lost its persuasive power. They see through it now. They recognize it as a mechanism that historically transferred responsibility and resources disproportionately in one direction while framing dissent as immaturity or selfishness. That framing no longer lands. Men embrace the label of selfish when it means prioritizing health, wealth, peace, and purpose over obligation without return. They redefine the term on their terms. Selfish becomes synonymous with self respecting. It becomes the prerequisite for offering anything genuine to others. A man who has not first secured his own foundation has little of substance to share. Depleted resources produce depleted relationships. Balanced men produce balanced dynamics. The logic is inescapable. Those who demand participation without first demonstrating equal value encounter polite refusal. The refusal carries no malice. It simply reflects accurate assessment. Men conserve what they have rebuilt. They protect the calm they have cultivated. They invest only where reciprocity is assured. This selective investment raises standards across the board. When men do engage, they bring clarity, consistency, strength, and zero tolerance for games. The bar sits so high that only those willing to match it can cross. The result is either exceptional partnerships or sustained independence. Both outcomes serve the man well. Neither leaves him diminished. Society continues grappling with the implications. Birth rates fall further, marriage rates stagnate or decline. Economic modeling adjusts to smaller household sizes and altered consumption patterns. Cultural products slowly begin reflecting the new reality rather than clinging to outdated tropes. Media portrayals of single men evolve from pitiful to purposeful. Discussions of gender dynamics grow more honest as lived experience overrides ideology. Younger generations absorb these lessons early. Boys entering adulthood witness older men thriving in autonomy and emulate the pattern instinctively. They adopt boundary setting as baseline behavior rather than learned response to pain. They view pursuit as optional rather than obligatory. They treat their time, energy, and resources as sacred from the outset. The cycle shortens, the damage decreases, the empowerment accelerates. Men across age groups converge on the same conclusion. Peace is non negotiable. They guard it fiercely because they know its true cost. They remember the years spent chasing approval, enduring imbalance, absorbing chaos, and emerging drained. They contrast that memory with the present and feel only gratitude for the decision to walk away. The path ahead stretches open and unburdened. Opportunities multiply when obligation recedes. Potential compounds when distraction vanishes. Life becomes a canvas for deliberate creation rather than reactive survival. Men paint boldly now. They build businesses without fear of asset division. They travel without negotiation. They study without interruption. They create without censorship. They connect without agenda. Every choice flows from internal alignment rather than external pressure. The freedom is intoxicating, yet sustainable because it rests on discipline rather than escapism. Men maintain rigor in health, finances, skills, and character because they understand that excellence protects freedom. Complacency would erode it. Mediocrity would invite dependence. They reject both. The discipline feels light because it serves a purpose they have chosen rather than one imposed upon them. Each repetition in the gym, each dollar saved, each book completed, each boundary enforced adds to the fortress of self reliance. The structure grows stronger with time. It withstands economic storms, cultural headwinds, personal setbacks. It provides shelter when external systems falter. Men stand inside that shelter calm and clear eyed. They observe the turbulence without being swept into it. They offer help when it aligns with their values, but never at the expense of their foundation. Generosity flows from abundance rather than obligation. Compassion emerges without self sacrifice. Strength manifests without performance. The man who once bent to accommodate now stands firm without apology. He has earned that stance through years of observation, reflection, trial, and correction. The lessons have been hard, but the reward surpasses the cost. Peace has become his default state. Contentment has become his baseline. Purpose has become his guiding star. In this alignment, he moves forward unhurried and unafraid. The world may continue its debates about gender, roles, expectations, and futures. Men have largely exited that debate. They participate only when it serves them. Otherwise, they build quietly. They thrive silently. They prosper steadily. Their example speaks louder than any argument. Younger men see it and follow. Older men see it and nod in recognition. The shift solidifies, not through proclamation, but through accumulation of individual choices. Each man who chooses himself adds weight to the scale. Each life rebuilt in solitude tips the balance further. The momentum builds organically. It cannot be reversed by guilt, shame, policy, or nostalgia because it rests on irrefutable personal truth. Men know what they have gained. They know what they have left behind. They have no desire to return. The road they walk now leads only forward. It leads toward greater mastery, deeper calm, wider horizons, and unbreakable sovereignty. They travel light because they carry everything essential within. They travel far because no tether holds them back. They travel purposefully because the destination is not a place, but a state of being. That state has a name now. It is called home, and they have finally arrived. The arrival at the state of unassailable self ownership marks the point where external narratives lose nearly all traction. Men no longer feel the pull of guilt when they decline invitations that carry unspoken expectations. They no longer flinch at accusations of being emotionally unavailable because they understand that availability was never meant to be unconditional surrender. They have redefined availability as a privilege granted not only after consistent proof of safety, respect, and alignment. Until that proof materializes, they remain comfortably unavailable, and the label carries no sting. Instead, it functions as a shield. It filters out those who would demand access without earning it. It preserves the sanctuary they have so carefully constructed. This sanctuary is not fragile. It has been forged through deliberate repetition of choices that favor long term integrity over short term comfort. Every time a man chooses rest over reactivity, discipline over distraction, clarity over compromise, the structure strengthens, the foundation deepens, the walls rise higher, not as barriers against the world, but as protection for what has become genuinely precious, uninterrupted access to his own potential. In this protected space, men experiment freely with what it means to live without apology. They explore interests that society once deemed frivolous or unmanly because those judgments no longer register. They collect rare books, restore vintage machinery, master obscure musical instruments, study ancient languages, cultivate bonsai, brew complex coffee, hike remote trails at dawn, code personal projects that solve problems only they care about. None of these pursuits needs justification beyond personal fascination. The absence of an audience removes performance pressure and allows pure immersion. Flow states become routine rather than rare. Mastery arrives faster because feedback comes solely from the work itself rather than from external praise or criticism. Satisfaction compounds quietly. A man finishes a project and feels the deep click of completion without needing to share it for validation. He knows the value because he measured it against his own standards. This internal metric system replaces the old external one entirely. Success no longer requires witnesses. Achievement no longer demands applause. Fulfillment arrives in silence and feels more authentic for it. The quiet nature of these victories often surprises men at first. They expected some lingering emptiness, yet instead encounter fullness that feels earned rather than borrowed. They realize that much of what they once chased in relationships was not connection, but distraction from self doubt. Once self doubt dissolves through consistent proof of competence and resilience, the need for distraction vanishes. What remains is curiosity, unburdened by insecurity. Men ask bigger questions. They wonder about legacy not in terms of offspring or public recognition, but in terms of impact on systems, ideas, communities they choose to engage. Some mentor younger men, informally sharing frameworks for boundary enforcement, financial independence, emotional regulation, without ever framing it as advice. Others contribute anonymously to open source projects, write detailed guides on forums, fund micro initiatives that align with their values. The common thread is contribution without attachment to outcome. They give because it enhances their own sense of agency, not because it obligates return. This detachment from reciprocity in non romantic domains paradoxically makes genuine reciprocity more likely when it does appear. People sense the lack of agenda and respond with openness rather than defensiveness. Trust builds organically in these low stakes interactions. Networks expand not through networking events, but through shared competence and mutual recognition of quality. Men find themselves surrounded by others who operate on similar principles. Conversations turn substantive quickly. Debates remain civil because ego investment stays low. Collaboration happens effortlessly when goals align. Competition exists only as friendly challenge rather than zero sum struggle. The social ecosystem that forms around this mindset feels lighter and more durable than previous ones. It withstands disagreements because no one depends on approval for identity. It survives distance because connection rests on respect rather than constant contact. It grows stronger through selectivity rather than volume. Men protect this ecosystem as fiercely as they protect their solitude because both serve the same end: preservation of peace and acceleration of personal evolution. They recognize that poor company erodes progress faster than solitude ever could. Toxic influences introduce doubt, distraction, comparison, drama. High quality influences introduce perspective, accountability, inspiration, calm challenge. The discernment required to tell the difference sharpens with practice. Men learn to read character through small actions rather than grand statements. Consistency over time trumps intensity in moments. Integrity shows in how someone treats those who can do nothing for them. Reciprocity reveals itself in willingness to admit fault without deflection. These tests run continuously and mostly subconsciously. Those who pass accumulate trust. Those who fail accumulate distance. The process feels natural rather than judgmental because it stems from self protection rather than superiority. Men apply the same standard to themselves first. They hold their own behavior to rigorous scrutiny. They correct course when they drift toward entitlement or inconsistency. They apologize when warranted without theatrical self flagellation. They maintain accountability internally so external accountability becomes unnecessary. This self governance creates a feedback loop of increasing integrity. Each correction reinforces the habit, each alignment deepens self trust. Self trust becomes the foundation for every other form of trust. When a man trusts himself completely, he no longer fears betrayal because he knows he can recover from anything. He no longer fears abandonment because he has proven he can thrive alone. He no longer fears conflict because he has mastered de escalation and exit. Fear recedes across the board. What replaces it is calm readiness. Men move through the world with a quiet alertness that reads situations accurately without paranoia. They assess risk without obsession. They engage without overinvestment. They disengage without guilt. The emotional range narrows in a positive sense. Extreme highs and lows flatten into steady equanimity, punctuated by genuine moments of joy, amusement, satisfaction, awe. Drama no longer feels compelling. Intensity without purpose registers as noise. Men gravitate toward experiences that produce clean emotion rather than turbulent spikes. A perfect sunrise hike delivers more dopamine than any nightclub ever did. Solving a complex problem alone feels more rewarding than winning an argument. Watching a skilled craftsman at work inspires more than any influence or monologue. The sources of meaning shift toward depth and authenticity. Superficiality loses appeal entirely. Men notice how much cultural messaging pushes toward constant stimulation, performative vulnerability, curated aesthetics, endless comparison. They see it now as a distraction machine designed to keep people unsettled and therefore consumptive. They opt out deliberately. They reduce screen time not through willpower, but through lack of interest. They curate feeds ruthlessly to eliminate outrage bait and status signaling. They consume media that informs or elevates rather than agitates or seduces. Information becomes a tool rather than entertainment. Knowledge accumulates purposefully rather than reactively. Wisdom emerges as pattern recognition across domains rather than memorized facts. Men connect to disparate fields in ways that produce novel insights. A mechanic might draw parallels between engine tuning and financial compounding. A programmer might apply systems thinking to relationship dynamics even while abstaining from them. A historian might map current gender trends against centuries of power shifts. These cross pollinations enrich thinking without requiring external dialogue. The internal dialogue becomes rich enough to sustain long periods of solitude without boredom. Boredom itself transforms into creative tension. When stimulation is absent, the mind generates its own. Ideas arrive unbidden. Solutions appear during walks or showers or quiet evenings. Men learn to capture these moments rather than let them slip. Notebooks fill with fragments that later coalesce into projects, businesses, philosophies, art. Output increases precisely because input becomes intentional rather than compulsive. The rhythm of life slows, yet productivity rises. Paradoxes resolve when pace aligns with purpose. Men discover they accomplish more by doing less, but doing it better. They eliminate multitasking entirely. They focus on one domain until mastery plateaus, then shift without guilt. They rest deliberately rather than collapse from exhaustion. Recovery becomes strategic rather than reactive. Sleep hygiene turns non negotiable. Nutrition becomes engineering rather than indulgence. Movement becomes medicine rather than punishment. All elements integrate into a system optimized for sustained high performance across decades rather than short bursts followed by burnout. The long view dominates decision making. Choices made today are evaluated against their impact at 50, 60, 70. Men ask whether a habit will compound positively or negatively over 30 years. They discard anything with a negative trajectory, no matter how pleasurable in the moment. Instant gratification loses allure when delayed compounding becomes visible. Small daily disciplines reveal their power through visible transformation. A 1% improvement sustained for a decade produces exponential difference. Men track these arcs privately and marvel at the results. Bodies reshape, minds expand, finances multiply, skills deepen, resilience hardens. The man at 40 looks back at 30 and sees someone still carrying unnecessary weight. He looks forward to 50 and sees freedom unimagined at 25. The trajectory feels exhilarating because it rests entirely under his control. No external force can revoke the gains, no court can divide them, no partner can destabilize them, no cultural shift can invalidate them. They exist as lived proof of principle. The principle is simple yet revolutionary in practice. A man who owns himself completely cannot be owned by anyone else. He cannot be manipulated through guilt, shame, scarcity, or promise. He cannot be leveraged through sex, affection, status, or approval. He stands outside those currencies because he prints his own. The currency is peace, agency, competence, integrity, time. It appreciates steadily. It cannot be inflated away or seized. It grows in value as long as he continues the disciplines that generated it. Men guard this currency with quiet ferocity. They share it selectively with those who demonstrate they understand its worth. They withhold it from those who treat it casually. The selectivity feels effortless because abundance exists internally. Scarcity mindset has vanished entirely. There is no rush, there is no desperation, there is only deliberate motion toward greater alignment. The path narrows, yet the horizon widens. Every step sheds weight, every mile increases clarity. Men travel lighter now than ever before. They carry only what serves the journey. Everything else has been left behind without regret. The landscape ahead stretches open and inviting. They walk it steadily, eyes clear, heart calm, purpose certain. They have become the architects of their own reality, and the reality feels infinitely preferable to the one they once accepted by default. In this new architecture, every room serves a function. Every corridor leads somewhere meaningful. Every window opens onto possibility rather than obligation. The structure stands solid because it was built slowly, intentionally, honestly. It will endure storms because it was designed with them in mind. Men rest inside the structure knowing they built it themselves. They sleep deeply, they wake purposefully. They live fully without apology or explanation. The story continues not as narrative imposed from outside, but as one written day by day in their own hand. Each page turns with intention. Each chapter builds on the last. The ending remains unwritten, yet the direction feels unmistakably upward. Men embrace the uncertainty of that upward arc because they trust the hand holding the pen. They trust themselves completely now. That trust is the final and most powerful shift of all. The sovereignty men claim in this final stage becomes so complete that even the concept of loss fades from relevance. What could possibly be lost when nothing external holds the power to define or diminish the core self anymore? Possessions come and go without emotional upheaval because ownership has shifted inward. Status markers that once carried weight now register as neutral objects devoid of intrinsic meaning. Relationships, should they ever re enter the picture, arrive as additions rather than necessities. The man no longer approaches them from a place of deficit that needs filling. He approaches from surplus. He has already filled every essential need himself. Companionship becomes a choice made from curiosity and genuine affinity rather than from loneliness or societal script. When it appears, it enhances an already robust existence rather than rescuing a fragile one. The difference proves decisive. Dynamics stabilize because neither party enters carrying desperation. Expectations align because both understand value flows mutually or not at all. Conflict dissolves before it escalates because neither invests ego in winning petty battles. Growth occurs in parallel rather than in opposition. Each person pursues their own trajectory while sharing space temporarily or long term. Separation, should it occur, leaves no wreckage because attachment never crossed into dependence. The man walks away intact, perhaps with gratitude for the shared chapter, but never with the hollowed out feeling that once accompanied endings. Endings themselves lose their terror. Beginnings lose their frantic urgency. Life becomes a series of fluid chapters rather than a desperate search for permanent resolution. Men embrace impermanence as the natural order rather than a threat to be neutralized through control or possession. They observe change without resistance. Seasons turn, opportunities arise and pass. People enter and exit, bodies age, fortunes fluctuate. Through it all, the center remains steady. That center consists of accumulated discipline, hard won clarity, unshakable self trust, and the quiet knowledge that no external event can revoke what has been internally forged. This knowledge immunizes against manipulation of every variety. Promises of future security no longer sway decisions because security already exists in present form. Threats of withdrawal no longer provoke anxiety because withdrawal has already been practiced voluntarily and found liberating. Appeals to duty or tradition no longer compel because duty has been redefined as fidelity to personal truth rather than conformity to collective expectation. Men live according to this redefined duty without fanfare or need for external acknowledgement. They pay taxes, uphold contracts, honor commitments they have freely made, contribute to systems that function fairly, but they do so from a place of conscious choice rather than ingrained obligation. When systems tilt unfairly, they withdraw participation to the minimum required by law and redirect energy elsewhere. They vote with behavior more than ballots. They support institutions that align with merit and reciprocity. They ignore or quietly subvert those that punish competence or reward parasitism. This selective engagement preserves integrity without descending into cynicism. They remain functional citizens while refusing to be sacrificial lambs. The balance feels sustainable because it rests on accurate assessment rather than ideological purity or blind allegiance. Men apply the same rigorous assessment to cultural trends that once commanded automatic deference. Marriage as an institution receives scrutiny rather than reverence. They examine divorce probabilities, asset division patterns, custody outcomes, alimony structures, and social incentives. They weigh those realities against the personal cost benefit equation and frequently conclude that formal commitment carries disproportionate downside in current conditions. Cohabitation without legal entanglement emerges as a middle path for those who still desire partnership. Even then, agreements clarify finances, responsibilities, and exit terms up front. Transparency replaces romantic idealism. Reality testing replaces blind faith. Men insist on these safeguards not from mistrust of individuals, but from recognition of systemic incentives that reward certain behaviors over others. When incentives change, so might willingness to engage more deeply. Until then, caution prevails. Caution does not equate to bitterness, it equates to intelligence. Men have learned through direct experience and collective observation that optimism without evidence functions as self sabotage. They cultivate measured optimism grounded in observable patterns rather than wishful thinking. They hope for improvement in gender dynamics while preparing for a continuation of current trends. Preparation takes the form of relentless self investment. They build emergency funds large enough to weather years of disruption. They develop multiple income streams to reduce vulnerability to single point failure. They cultivate skills that remain in demand regardless of economic cycle or cultural shift. They maintain physical condition that supports independence into old age. They forge social bonds based on shared principles rather than proximity or convenience. These preparations create anti fragility. Setbacks strengthen rather than weaken. Volatility becomes opportunity rather than threat. Men thrive in uncertainty because uncertainty no longer threatens their foundation. The foundation exists independently of external conditions. It exists in character forged through adversity, in habits sustained through boredom, in decisions made against social current, in the refusal to outsource well being. That refusal marks the sharpest break from previous generations. Earlier cohorts often outsourced emotional regulation, financial security, identity validation, purpose definition to wives, girlfriends, employers, institutions, communities. When those external anchors weakened or withdrew, the result was disorientation, resentment, collapse. Men today anchor internally first. External anchors serve as supplementary reinforcement rather than primary support. The hierarchy protects against cascading failure. When one external element falters, the core remains untouched. Recovery happens faster. Adaptation occurs smoother. Resilience compounds rather than depletes. This compounding creates accelerating returns across every domain. A man at 35 who has internalized these principles often operates at a level of composure, competence, and freedom that previous generations reached, if ever, only in late middle age after decades of trial and error. The acceleration stems from deliberate learning rather than accidental survival. Men study failure patterns systematically. They analyze postmortems of collapsed relationships, careers derailed by imbalance, health destroyed by chronic stress. They extract principles. They test those principles in low stakes environments. They refine through iteration. They scale what works. The scientific mindset applied to life design produces exponential improvement. Trial and error becomes hypothesis driven experimentation. Feedback loops tighten. Progress accelerates. Men reach mastery states in multiple domains simultaneously because energy, once fragmented across emotional labor, now concentrates on high leverage activities. Mastery begets confidence. Confidence begets bolder experimentation. Bolder experimentation begets faster mastery. The virtuous cycle spins faster with each revolution. At some point, velocity becomes self sustaining. External input diminishes in importance because internal momentum carries the load. Men enter flow across life rather than in isolated pockets. Daily existence feels like continuous creation rather than maintenance punctuated by crisis. Challenges arrive, but they register as puzzles rather than threats. Solutions emerge naturally because mental models have been stress tested repeatedly. Intuition sharpens through pattern recognition across thousands of micro decisions. Wisdom manifests as economy of action. Men waste fewer words, fewer movements, fewer resources. Efficiency becomes elegance. Minimalism evolves beyond possessions into minimalism of effort. They achieve more by striving less because striving aligns perfectly with outcome. Misaligned effort disappears entirely. The man who once chased approval now creates value effortlessly because creation serves self first. Value spills outward naturally without deliberate marketing or seduction. People notice quality when it exists, independent of need for recognition. Attraction occurs as byproduct rather than goal. Respect arrives unbidden. Influence spreads quietly. Leadership emerges without title because men lead themselves first and others follow example instinctively. They do not preach, they demonstrate. Demonstration proves more persuasive than any argument. Younger men watch and replicate. Patterns transmit virally through observed results rather than through manifestos. The cultural shift happens bottom up through accumulation of individual transformations. No central authority directs it. No manifesto codifies it. No revolution announces it. It simply happens as more men reach the same conclusion through parallel paths. They conclude that self ownership trumps every alternative once tasted. They conclude that peace outweighs passion when passion comes packaged with chaos. They conclude that freedom requires solitude more often than society admits. They conclude that reciprocity cannot be negotiated into existence, but must be selected into existence. They conclude that dignity demands walking away from anything less. These conclusions harden into convictions. Convictions guide behavior automatically. Behavior produces results. Results reinforce convictions. The loop closes and strengthens. Men live inside this closed loop, calm and certain. The world outside may rage with debates about declining fertility, loneliness epidemics, gender wars, economic stagnation, cultural decay. Men observe these phenomena with detached curiosity. They understand root causes through direct participation in the system. They see how incentives misaligned long ago. They see how messaging glorified independence while quietly relying on interdependence. They see how blame flowed one direction while burdens flowed the other. They see how short term gains produce long term asymmetries. They see and they step aside. They allow the system to reveal its own contradictions without interference. They build parallel structures in the meantime, structures based on mutual respect, voluntary association, transparent exchange, earned trust. These structures prove more durable because they rest on reality rather than ideology. They scale slowly but organically. They attract participants who value substance over narrative. They endure because exit remains costless. No one stays out of guilt or inertia. Participation continues only while value flows both ways. When it ceases, the bond dissolves cleanly. No wreckage accumulates. No resentment festers. Energy redirects immediately toward more promising ventures. The absence of sunk cost fallacy keeps systems healthy. Men apply this principle universally. They cut losses early in investments, friendships, habits, ideas. They preserve capital in every form. Capital accumulates, options multiply, leverage increases, power shifts subtly toward those who need least. Needlessness becomes the ultimate advantage. Men cultivate needlessness deliberately. They reduce dependencies systematically. They eliminate single points of failure relentlessly. They become self contained units capable of thriving under almost any condition. Thriving looks different for each man, yet shares common markers: calm presence, deliberate action, quiet amusement at absurdity, steady progress, absence of complaint, genuine curiosity about the world, generosity from abundance rather than performance. These markers signal completion of the journey from exhaustion to sovereignty. The journey never truly ends because maintenance requires eternal vigilance. Yet the heavy lifting concludes. What remains is refinement. Refinement feels light, it feels joyful, it feels like play rather than work. Men play seriously. They pursue excellence for its own sake. They explore edges because edges reveal truth. They create because creation satisfies something primal. They connect because connection enriches without compromising. They rest because rest sustains. They live fully in each moment because no moment borrows from the next. The present expands when future anxiety recedes and past regret dissolves. Time stretches subjectively. Days feel richer. Years feel slower. Life lengthens in perceived duration through depth rather than extension. Men savor simplicity because simplicity has been earned through complexity. They embrace routine because routine has been chosen rather than imposed. They find beauty in ordinary moments because extraordinary validation no longer overshadows them. A quiet walk at dusk carries more significance than any public accolade ever could. A well executed deadlift feels more triumphant than any conquest. A solved problem delivers deeper satisfaction than any seduction. The hierarchy of rewards inverts completely. Internal victories eclipse external ones. The man who once measured himself against others now measures himself against yesterday's version. Progress becomes private yet profound. Pride swells without arrogance, and gratitude emerges without sentimentality. Contentment settles without complacency. The state feels complete yet open to further evolution. Men stand in this state looking back at the long arc. They see exhaustion that once defined them. They see rejection that once stung. They see burdens that once crushed. They see illusions that once captivated. They see and they smile without malice. Those experiences forged the present. Without them, the present would lack depth. They feel no need to rewrite history. They feel only appreciation for the curriculum that produced current clarity. Looking forward, they see open horizon. Possibilities branch infinitely because no single path carries obligation. They choose moment by moment, guided by internal compass. The compass points toward greater alignment, deeper mastery, wider contribution, sustained peace. They follow without haste. They arrive repeatedly, yet never finish arriving. Arrival becomes process rather than destination. Life becomes art rather than performance. Men live that art quietly, consistently, unapologetically. They have walked away from everything that diminished them and walked toward everything that elevates them. The path has led home. Home exists inside. It travels with them, it shelters them, it defines them. And in that definition, they find final rest while remaining fully alive. To to the 1 hour gang, you have made it to the very end of this deep dive, and that level of commitment deserves real respect. If these angry guy breakdowns resonate with you and you want more of this unfiltered clarity, one of the best ways to fuel the next one is by grabbing me a Red Bull through the link in the description. It keeps the fire going. Now tell me in the comments what hit hardest from everything laid out here today. Do you see the same patterns playing out around you? Do you agree that this shift represents a permanent rebalancing rather than a phase? Drop your thoughts honestly. I read everyone. Like the video if you like it. Do not forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MUA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.